All right, it's 7 o'clock on my watch, so let's go ahead and get started. And thank you everyone for joining us for our May chapter meeting today. I want to add the pictures that you see are some of the pictures that I was able to capture from the city nature challenge, which just ended. Our agenda is our usual agenda. We'll make a few announcements, cover a couple of things before tonight's guest speaker, Dr. Amy Bonka. And then we'll cover some of the key advanced trainings that we have found and some of the volunteer opportunities for us to just sort of touch on real quick. We did have our drive-through on April 17th, and we had roughly about 60 or so of you show up and attend, including our graduates from our 2021 class. And so it was great to see everybody, even though the weather wasn't quite the best. I think it was definitely something that we've been meaning and wanting to do for such a long time. So it was great to see everybody. Anybody that did not get a chance to pick up their certificate, their pin and whatnot, shoot me an email and we'll make arrangements to try to get them to you. We still have quite a few that have not picked up theirs, but we're happy to make arrangements to get them to you. So again, congratulations to our class that graduated this year, and it was great to see everybody. We do have two milestones that we want to recognize. Newly certified Carolyn Wolfer. If you guys remember, she was our student from the San Antonio area, and Betsy has reached her 100-hour milestone. So congratulations, Betsy. These are our milestones that we definitely want to be able to celebrate in person, and we'll save these up for the next time we get together, but congratulations. As I mentioned, the City Nature Challenge did come to the end. I keep going back to take a look at our Lower Rio Grande Valley site, and the numbers keep changing. So I think these are unofficial, but we did have a pretty good swath of our region covered. And hopefully we can use some of the information that we've learned from this exercise to plan our 2022 Nature Challenge. Thanks a lot to Tyra who helped us sort of coordinate some of these efforts. And one of the things I was thinking about is looking at this, thinking, okay, how do we get to those areas that we didn't make any observations? And we also want to meet the people that made the observations out there in the middle of the Gulf, so we can borrow their boat and get out there and make some observations out there too. Just kidding. But this was the first time that I participated, and it was actually a whole lot of fun. To go out there and take pictures of basically anything you see. I mean, any one place had 40, 50 pictures that I could take. And I actually found it really interesting to try to find out what this was. And there's a couple of pictures that I have out there that they're still being passed around to try to figure out what it is. And it's that unique wildflower that showed up in our yard this year that I've never seen before. And so far, at least a few people haven't seen it either. So little things like that I found really, really enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to doing this again next year. And I think there will be sort of an assessment, a summary of the Lower Rio Grande Valley participation, more than likely posted on our Facebook page as soon as it's available. Now, our Pelican Squadron group, if you guys remember, they held a contest with the Port Isabel students, the art department, on designing a mascot for our brochures and outreach efforts that we're going to make for sort of share with the community the perils of the pelicans in our region. And so this is the winning artwork from Liliana Cisneros. And if you remember, part of the competition was to try to decide what the name was. So this is Senor Pele. Really nice piece of work. I think it's still going to be out there on display at the Art Center Gallery on Port Isabel. And thanks a lot to the Pelican Squadron, Pat Avery, Kate DeGenero, Diana Lehman for their efforts. This is, if you guys were on early and Diana was complaining about being really tired, this is what she was really tired about. Because it does take a lot of effort, a lot of coordination, a lot of communication, a lot of extra work to pull this off. and they did a fantastic job. And I think this student definitely came up with a piece of artwork that we'll be proud to put on as our mascot in either brochures, pamphlets. I'd love to see this on a t-shirt as well. So again, this is what we're going to try to do, to try to share with the community, to drive slow. Whenever the conditions are right, our pelicans are being caught in a really difficult place, either on Highway 48 or Highway 100. And so we'll try to reach the public to let them know what's going on. And hopefully we can even include, like in this effort, students in our community to sort of help us deliver that message, because I think it's a really good one for us to participate. And this was a really first effort from our chapter, I think, to do this kind of outreach. And hopefully it's the first of many attempts that we'll do to involve the community and do something that some of you really have a passion for. So congratulations, and again, thanks to the Pelican Squadron for championing this effort. Okay, moving on to our speaker tonight. Dr. Amy Bonka is the Chief Conservation Officer at Sea Turtle Inc. She was, if I'm correct, she was assumed that position in 2020. And I'll read a little bit about her before she takes over the meeting. With extensive sea turtle nesting, sea turtle research, and community building experience, Amy will play a significant role in sea turtle conservation. As the organization's first Chief Conservation Officer, she will lead the conservation and rehabilitation of sea turtles and grow Sea Turtle Inc.'s research program. I shared to everyone a little bit about her background, some links and so forth. She's before the call into the nonprofit role, Amy excelled in academia. She obtained a Bachelor of Science in Biology with a concentration in marine science. Following graduation, Amy spent several nesting seasons working with Kemp's Ridley turtles in Rancho Nuevo, Mexico. Inspired by this work to focus on the Kemp's Ridley during graduation school studies, she obtained her master's and PhD degrees in biology from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Her research has focused on the ecology, biology, and conservation of the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle, Texas's state sea turtle. Her research interests include the dynamics of Arabata nesting, the mass nesting events that occur in Kemp's Ridley and olive Ridley sea turtles, as well as hatching biology. So we welcome tonight our speaker, Dr. Amy Bonka. And Amy, if you give me a second, I'll make you the presenter.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. I'm very excited to be here with you guys tonight. All right, looks like I'm a presenter, so let me share. Okay. You guys see the slideshow on your end as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yes, I am going to talk tonight about Kemp's Ridleys, about sea turtle nesting, and specifically about nesting season with the Kemp's Ridleys, some of their background, as well as what's going on right now here on our beaches, because we are in fact in sea turtle nesting season. And so to give you an idea of what that entails, I'm going to start with some background on the Kemp's Ridley, go into some of that biology and ecology of the Kemp's Ridley, talk about some of that historical aspect to it, just so we all kind of understand going into it what that nesting season looks like. And I'm going to talk about some of my previous research projects, and so that includes some of my research that did occur at Rancho Nuevo in Mexico. And then I'm going to get into what we're doing here on South Padre and Boca Chica Beach, as well as what I see for the future of our program, where I hope to take and grow our program, what areas I'm interested in, as well as answer any and hopefully all of your questions, and hopefully, have some discussion regarding research towards the end as well. So to start with, a little bit of background on our Kemp's Ridley. It is the most critically endangered of our sea turtles. So IUCN, the red list, lists it as critically endangered. And it's often stated that it is the most critically endangered of our sea turtles. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it has a very limited range and predominantly one primary nesting beach. So it nests predominantly at a place called Rancho Nuevo, and we'll get into that in just a little bit as well. But it's also looking at kind of some more of the biological aspects of our Kemp's Ridley. It's one of our smallest species of sea turtles. So we're looking at a carapace length, or that shell length, from basically the neck region, right about here, all the way towards kind of that tail region of about 60 to 65 centimeters. So relatively small. And also relatively small in weight. So we're looking at about 45 kilograms. So that's about 100 pounds. So, you know, 1.5 to 2 feet and about 100 pounds. So small, kind of lightweight. And that's going to come back in when we talk about its nesting and some of the behaviors that are associated with it. And specifically when we're looking at patrolling and looking for these nests, and how it being such a small turtle factors into some of that difficulty of finding some of their nests and some of the other ecological factors that go into it. So not only are they the most endangered, not only are they the smallest, but they actually have the most restricted distribution of any of our sea turtle species. So they're predominantly found in the Gulf of Mexico, and almost exclusively. So we have 5 species here in the Gulf. We have the leatherback sea turtle, we have the loggerhead, we have green sea turtles, as we saw in the cold sun event, because almost all of those were green sea turtles. So we have leatherbacks, loggerheads, greens, we have some hawksbills, and we also have the Kemp's Ridley. Now, of that, basically all 4 of those 5 are found in other areas as well. So we can find them in various distributions, but the Kemp's Ridley, we're really going to find almost exclusively in the Gulf. Now, there are some that you'll see nesting in, say, Alabama, Florida will get some nesting, very small numbers in sometimes South Carolina, Georgia, that area. So we do have some a little bit along the Atlantic. That's partly what probably contributed to that cold sun event that we saw in December. So if you guys remember back in December, Sea Turtle Inc. took in 20 juvenile Kemp's Ridleys that were cold sun up in the New England area. Those turtles had moved into some of their shallower bays, were cold sun in that area, and they had such a big event that they needed to displace some of those to other facilities. And we took in some of those. We took in 20 of them. And so some of those juveniles may have been coming from some of that nesting that was occurring along the Atlantic, but for the most part, we really do find Kemp's Ridleys predominantly in the Gulf of Mexico. And we see again that most of that nesting is going to occur at a place called or near Rancho Nuevo. We do have nesting here in South Texas, though, as we know. And so let's talk about that for a minute. So we have Kemp's Ridley sea turtles that are found basically, like I've said, throughout the Gulf of Mexico. They're going to be foraging, adults are foraging all along that Gulf of Mexico. Can you guys see my pointer out of curiosity? Like my mouse? I'll take that as maybe a yes. All right, so we're going to find them kind of along in relatively, okay, great. So we're going to find them here kind of along the coast. Our adults are going to kind of be foraging. Some of our population is going to be foraging along kind of the Florida waters or over in the Eastern Gulf. We have some of them that'll be foraging down here kind of more near the Yucatan. They come nesting season. So come in those early months, we're looking at March, sometimes into February. It depends a little bit on temperature. But we will see that they start to migrate towards those nesting grounds. Majority of them are going to be migrating here towards that Rancho Nuevo area. Rancho Nuevo is about 6 hours south of us here, and that's where the majority of it occurs. However, we do have some that nest in the U.S., like I mentioned, and the majority of the nesting that occurs in the U.S. occurs here in South Texas. So we are very lucky in that of the U.S. nesting, it is mostly here. So that when I say here in South Texas, that means Boca Chica Beach. That means South Padre Island, North Padre Island. We'll get some a little bit further up the Texas coast as well. But again, most of it here in South Texas. So this makes, I think, us in a really unique position in that we have the ability to affect the conservation of this species here as well as in at its primary nesting beach in Rancho Nuevo. So another thing that's really interesting about the Kemp's Ridleys, I think, aside from being our smallest turtle, from having a really restricted distribution, is its nesting behaviors. So of our Ridley turtles, so we have 2 species within that genus. We have the Kemp's Ridley, which is the one I've been talking about and we're going to keep talking about, but we also have the olive Ridley. So the olive ridley is also in that genus, and it's similar to our Kemp's ridley. It's similar in size. It's a little bit bigger, but they're pretty similar in that size range. They both have a very kind of circular shaped shell. Most of our other species have more of a oval shaped shell, but our ridleys have more of that circle. And those two species have a really unique nesting behavior called Arabata nesting behavior. And that is basically a mass nesting behavior, meaning that we have large numbers of turtles showing up at the same time to nest. And an example of that is on the screen on the right. This is an Arabata that occurred at Rancho in 2018. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But they have large numbers of turtles that are showing up at one time to nest. However, between the two, between our olive ridleys and our Kemp's ridleys, our olive ridleys, despite this Arabata behavior, are more similar to the rest of our sea turtle species in that they primarily nest at night. Now, in our olive ridleys, their populations are much larger than the Kemp's ridley, so those nesting behaviors that Arabata can occur over days, and it can occur over many hours. They typically start at night, but they can go into the day, into the next night, things like that. But with our Kemp's ridleys, they typically nest in the daytime. They are our only sea turtle that has really evolved daytime nesting behavior, which to me, I think is incredibly interesting. And I think it makes for so many research questions that have really stemmed a lot of my research interest are from this kind of daytime mass nesting behavior. And so that's where a lot of my research has been focused. And I'm going to get into a couple dynamics related to that as we go through tonight's talk. And I'm going to come back around to that when we talk about future directions for some of the research interests that I have and what I see for growing our program. So they have this mass nesting behavior, and they've evolved to have this mass nesting behavior in the daytime. So we see based on this picture that in recent years, we've seen large numbers of turtles nesting, but it's important to talk about the history of the Kemp's ridley when we talk about Kemp's ridley nesting. And so looking back at Kemp's ridleys over the years, we had back in 1947, a man named Andres Herrera. He made this film of Kemp's ridley nesting. So he was an engineer based out of Tampico, and he had a lot of different passions. And one of them is he was a fisherman and heard about this area where there's all kinds of turtles and they come ashore at one time. So he made it his mission to find where this was and document this. And he had his own plane, which I think is really cool. So he flew flights and he would go out looking in areas that he heard about where this might occur. And finally, one day in June, he saw this happening and he was able to make a film of it. And you could just see what's been estimated at anywhere from about 20 to 40,000 turtles nesting at one time. And so that was basically our frame of reference for what this historical population looked like. Now, despite his best efforts, he was unable to get that film to the scientific community for many years. It was finally discovered and presented by a man named Henry Hildebrand, where he saw the film from Andres Herrera, presented it at a meeting, actually in Corpus Christi, I believe. And after that, we saw that the numbers that were now nesting at Rancho were much smaller than historically. And so in 1978, the Binational Kemp's Ridley Recovery Program was formed, and that was a joint effort between the Mexican government and the US government. And that was to protect Kemp's Ridleys on that nesting beach. It expanded to include work as well on the nesting beach, but also out in the waters. So one of the reasons that we saw this drastic drop in the numbers that were nesting was a combination of take on the nesting beach of eggs, as well as take of adults in the water from different fisheries, shrimpers, things like that. So there was this kind of joint effort of both governments to protect the nesting beaches, and we also saw this push to protect them in the water as well. And so we started to see this exponential growth. So we had, like I mentioned, back in 1947, estimated about 20 to 40,000 nesting females. When the program began back in the 1978, we were seeing only a few hundred. And as those numbers started to grow, we saw this exponential growth occur until about 2009. And in 2010, we're all pretty familiar with a big event that happened then, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So we're not certain exactly, necessarily all the effects that came from that, but we do know that Kemp's Ridleys were migrating through that area at the time that it occurred. it likely did have quite an effect on the population at some level, at least. And now what we're seeing is kind of this cyclical almost pattern. And so we're not really certain what's going on currently with the Kemp's Ridley, and I think that allows for a lot of really great questions as well. So keeping that in mind, that we had this historically large population, we saw the kind of this drop, and now we started to see this growth. We're coming back. With that growth, we start to see the resumption of these mass nesting events, of these Arabata nesting events. Now, they still saw them back when they only had several hundred turtles nesting for an entire season. It just occurred as, say, like maybe 20 turtles at a time instead of several hundred to several thousand turtles. But now we're seeing them in the several thousands. This is an example of one that occurred in 2013. I happened to be working there that summer, and it was absolutely wonderful. And so we got to see this event where we had hundreds of turtles basically in this case, it was about a 300-meter stretch of beach. So a relatively small area, and it was turtles after turtles, which is really amazing to see. And so we've seen this now occurring more frequently. So in, for example, 2018, we saw another one, a large-scale high-density Arabata occur. So we see these occurring now more often, and that has provided, to me, I think, some really great opportunities to look at this Arabata nesting behavior. So this is another example of an Arabata. And this slide, as well as the previous picture, were taken with a drone. So utilizing drones for that research project. We were able to do some estimations of the size of the Arabata, different things like that. But what I think is really interesting about looking at some of these is you can see all the different stages that are occurring, and we're going to talk about the stages of nesting. But we can see through these, the example of turtles that are just coming up, for example, some of these that we see in the water. As they're making their way up, you can see that they still have that kind of nice sheen to them. And then as they come up and they start their nesting process, they dry out. Again, they're daytime nesting, so they're nesting typically when it's hot, typically when it's very windy. So they start to crawl up. And as you can see, as they're crawling up, we can follow these crawls, and we'll see that they start to blend in really well with the sand. And so that's something that we're going to come back to when we talk about what are we doing here on our beaches as well. And so we see that they start to kind of blend in, they go through their nesting process, and then we can also follow them back into the surf. So here's an example of one that's heading back. This one's just now getting into that water, and we can see that contrast of how well they blend in versus how dark they are kind of when they first come out of that water. So again, I think that this resumption of this Arabata phenomenon, or seeing them occurring on these larger scales, has presented a lot of opportunity for a great way to look at some of these behaviors and what's going on with them. And that's part of what I have done with some of my previous research. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, again, so you guys can have an idea of some of my research background and some of the things that we were looking at, and then again, take that back and what does that mean for our beaches here? So one of the things that I looked at was the behaviors associated with that nesting. And so just to give you an idea of one of the ways that we did that, we utilized drone footage, but we also utilized GoPro cameras. So the cameras that, sometimes they use for like snowboarding or all different kinds of events, we actually mounted them on posts and were able to record Arabata footage. So they went out at a couple different sections on the nesting beach during one of these large high density Arabatas. And we were able to look at turtles as they came out of the water and follow them through all their stages and really get into that specifics of those nesting behavior. At Rancho Nuevo, to give you an idea, sorry, of their nesting beach, it's similar to the beaches that we have here. It's just a little more narrow than what we typically see on like South Padre and Boca Chica. And so the lower picture is an example of that beach. And so it's actually this lower picture that you're looking at is the area where we had one of those high density Arabatas. And so the top photo up here of this Arabata, it was actually occurring, that red dot corresponds to this area. The drone footage of each of these happened to be at slightly different times, and that's why the vegetation looks a little bit different, but it's that same area. So we're able to put them up and basically look out and see what's going on with these different behaviors. And they recorded footage for us at 10-second intervals over about approximate 4-hour window, and that was covering the majority of that nesting event. And so as you can see, we're able to look at that and see specific turtles and follow them throughout that nesting behavior. And so, for example, this is one area where we had high density portion of nesting. And so when we have these high density Arabatas, we get pockets of high density nesting, and then we get pockets of lower density. So we'll have, say, a high density here. We'll have a pocket where there's fewer turtles, and then we'll have a pocket where there's more turtles across kind of certain areas of the nesting beach. So this is an area where we had a high density, so a large number of turtles. And in fact, in this picture, there are 27 turtles. So we're able to take those pictures and we're able to go through them and basically follow individual turtles. And so as you can see, we would potentially follow, say, number 2 as it's coming out of the water, follow it up to undergo this nesting behavior and then return to that surf. And we did that also in these areas of lower density, so areas where we had smaller pockets of nesting. And for example, this is one of them where we had 5 turtles. So what that meant is that, like I said, we could follow individual turtles. So now we can see not only when are they coming up, what are they doing, but how long is it taking them to do that behavior. And so we were able to divide this down into specifics of those nesting behaviors. And so how long are they doing each behavior, what behavior, and what is the chronology of those behaviors. So we were able to look at quite a few individual turtles to follow them through this whole process. And what we saw were basically 6 typical behaviors. We started with crawling up the beach. So that means it has left the surf, it's working its way up the beach, looking for a place to nest. It is not actively nesting, but it's crawling up. It took about 2 minutes per turtle to do that process, to find a spot to start nesting. Come out of the water, I picked this spot. So then the first stage, once they've come out of the water and they found a spot to start nesting, is what we refer to as body pitting. And so body pitting is where they are making kind of a little indent spot that they can settle into nest in. So if we look at this photo here, we can see that turtle number 1 is crawling up, and we notice that turtle number 1, since it's crawling up, is basically even with the surface of the sand. But then if you look at turtle number 3 or turtle number 5, you can see how it has this indent around it, where it's kind of settled into the sand. And so body pitting is basically where it kind of moves some sand around for a little bit and gets a little spot for it to settle into. Body pitting took about 3 minutes. It was a relatively quick behavior. Once they've done that, once they've kind of settled in, they stick out their flippers, kind of anchor their flippers in, and then they start excavating the egg chamber. So what they do with that is they take their rear flippers and they use them basically like we do our hands, and they dig out and throw out sand behind them to excavate this egg chamber into that flask shape that they typically dig out to lay their eggs in. So it takes them about 15 minutes to dig out this chamber. And then they're going to lay their eggs. So laying their eggs took only about 15 minutes. And on average, our Kemp's-Ridleys are going to lay about 80 to 120 eggs. Their eggs are about the size of a ping pong ball. So if you think about playing ping pong, that's basically what our eggs look like, about that same size. And they're going to spend about 15 minutes actually actively laying their eggs. Now, from a research standpoint, this is kind of that critical window. So ovipositing, or when they're laying their eggs, they go into a trance-like state where not a lot will bother them. So this is typically where we are going to be tagging females, where we're going to be taking measurements, where we're going to be doing any of the workup, because she's basically not going to respond to external stimuli when she's in this laying process. She goes into that trance, and I myself have tagged many, many turtles during this time period. And when you pit tag them, or you give them a metal tag, which is like injecting, the pit tag is like about the size of a grain of rice, and it goes under the skin, like when you microchip your dog. They get a similar type tip that you can read with a scanner. So that gets injected just under the skin. Metal tagging is where you give them an external tag, and that metal tag is much like an earring for us. It's on the flipper as well. And I have had on many, many occasions that turtles basically don't even flinch during that process if you do it while they are actively laying their eggs. So about 15 minutes to actively lay the eggs. And following that, we're going to have the covering stage. So that's where the female is then going to cover up the nest. So she's done laying eggs. She's now going to push sand back into that hole with her rear flippers. She's going to take her front flippers and she's going to mess up that area a lot. And the thought behind this is that that is going to make it more difficult for predators to discover where that nest is. So we're messing up the nest a lot with the front flippers. We're packing it down with the back flippers. And then what's really interesting is Kemp's Ridleys undergo a padding behavior where they basically rock back and forth. We sometimes call it the turtle dance because they rock their shell back and forth to help pack down that nest. They swish it around with their front flippers. Once they finish that covering stage, which takes about 6 minutes, they then head right back to the surf. Going back to the surf is also very quick, much like coming up was, takes them about 3 minutes. So in total, we're looking at about 44 minutes on average for a turtle to come out of that water back here, head all the way up, undergo the nesting behavior, and get back in that water. So it's a very, very quick process. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about what we're doing on the nesting beach right now and how that relates into things like our patrol timing and what we're looking for and those factors. And so from that 45-minute window, comparing that across other species of sea turtles, we have a daytime nester, we have an Arabata nester, so mass nesting, and we see that we have a turtle that spends the shortest amount of time on a nesting beach across our sea turtle species on average. So our Kemp's Ridley's spending about 44 minutes, our graph on the far left, in comparison to our olive Ridleys, which are also small, also undergo that mass nesting behavior. They're a little bit closer to 60 minutes, so a little bit longer. But then when we get into things like our loggerheads, our greens, our leatherbacks, they are spending much, much more time on the beach. So loggerheads, we're looking at about 80 minutes. Green turtles, we've seen take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to nest. Leatherbacks can take over an hour, 2 hours, depending. So we're seeing longer durations in our turtles that are nesting during nighttime hours, but we're seeing this very short, very quick duration in our small daytime nester. So we have this daytime nester. We have this very short duration nesting. We have them coming up in these mass groups. And it's been hypothesized that this mass nesting is a form of predator satiation. So we have a lot of turtles coming up at one time to lay nests. It can overwhelm predators. Potentially it's disseminating their smell, so it's harder for them to find nests. If they do find nests, maybe they'll eat a few, but they can't eat all of them because they're all laid at the same time. And then when they hatch, they're going to be hatching around the same time. So that's one of the thoughts. And so I was interested in that specifically with the Kemp's Ridley and what does that look like on their nesting beach? So if they've potentially evolved this behavior to, as a response to predation, what is that like now after we had this drastic drop in the population, which in turn could have affected potentially the predator population that was supported by this behavior? And so one of the things that I was able to do was a look at that at this nesting beach over one of those high density Arabatas. And so I was able to put out some cameras and look at what's happening out there. And so had cameras out for what's considered 340 camera days. And so that means a camera day is where a camera was out for 24 hours consecutively. And this occurred across a high density nesting event. So from basically just before it happened through the happening of it and at the end, and able to look at all the different things that showed up. So I saw almost, was able to go through all those pictures. There were over 1.5 million of them. We can talk about how I analyzed that. Spoiler alert, it was basically me looking at pictures a lot. But I saw a lot of animals, and we were able to look at what does that beach look like now as far as predators and their abundance and how they're interacting with the turtles on that nesting beach. And so what we saw was a large number of avian predators and then a smaller number, but still abundant, of our mammalian predators. And so avian predators, that was predominantly our vultures, our caracaras, crows, as well as various species of herons. And then we also saw for mammals, coyotes, raccoons, and javelinas. Interestingly, this year, that year that I did this study, which was in predominantly in 2019, we didn't see any skunks. They've seen skunks before. I saw skunks when I worked there, but specifically during this study, didn't see any skunks, which is interesting. And I'd love to talk with you guys about that, on what your thoughts are on that, because I have some hypotheses as well. But we saw those avian predators, we saw mammalian predators. And so what was interesting was how these nest depredation events are occurring. And so looking back at some of the pictures, we saw a wide variety of instances of predation. We saw some examples where we would have more than one animal present. So for example, here there's 4 raccoons in this image. We can see the eye shine of 2 right back here. There's also 1 up in the foreground and then 1 off to the side. And so with raccoons, we would see them with raccoons, we'd sometimes see them by themselves, but we'd also see them in groups. We saw the same thing with some of our coyotes as they would come through. We also saw a couple times where we'd have coyotes sometimes in the morning, but predominantly in the afternoon. Where in that late afternoon, we'd see some come down from the dunes. So in this case, we had a coyote that was coming down from the dunes, and you can see it digging at a nest that was laid out a little further in the beach. I'd also see coyotes sometimes come down in the afternoon and make their way over into the ocean. They'd kind of bob over there for a little bit, then head back in the dunes and take the dune line down the beach for a little while. So we got to see some interesting different occurrences of predators at different times of the day. But most often we would see our mammalian predators overnight, and we'd see our avian predators during the daytime. So just a couple examples of that coyote digging. For avian predators, again, vultures and caracaras were the most common that I saw. Vultures were especially more predominant during hatching. So in this case, this is an area where there were quite a few nests that were left in situ. And so this was during hatching events. And so we would see basically as soon as the daylight kind of comes on, then the vultures and the caracaras move in. And we'd see quite a few, as you can see, birds on that beach. And this is from one morning, again, when there was hatching. So hatchling turtles were moving down the beach, and we can see several instances of vultures that are actually eating some of those hatchlings. And in fact, in this example, we can see that this vulture has a hatchling in its grip. For reference, each one of those sticks that has like a pink looking tape on it is a nest. And so like in this area where we have this lighter colored sand, that's where hatchlings move their way down the beach. And so we saw this predation of avian predators during the daytime. We saw more of the mammalian predators at night. And we also saw a succession of predation, meaning that one animal would open and expose the nest, but not necessarily eat all of it. But then other animals would then move in and feed on it as well. For example, here is one night where we saw 4 coyotes that came along, and these 4 coyotes opened and were feeding on a nest. And so the circle is around the little white spots. Those are eggs. So it dug up the eggs, ate some of them. Typically, we would see coyotes or raccoons open it and again, eat some of the eggs, but not necessarily eat all of them. So there theoretically would be more eggs that could be viable, but now they've been open and exposed, and we see other things moving in. So this coyote, in this instance, we had the 4 that came through. About an hour or so later, a single coyote came through. And you can see that same location in the morning. Once daybreak came, we have some vultures that have moved in to feed on those eggs, as well as caracara. And so don't typically see the birds actively exposing the nest, but definitely feeding on it once it is exposed. In this example, we had a couple different types of mammalian predators. A coyote came in first, exposed the nest, and then saw a raccoon come in, and then the bird. So in this case, the circle indicates our coyote. So our coyote kind of digging up, enjoying some sea turtle eggs, heads out. And then we have a raccoon coming through. So that's what the circle is around now. And that raccoon then fed on that nest that was exposed. And then again, a little while later with the daylight, the vultures come in. So we see vultures. So we saw that there was a succession of predation events. We saw that there were predators present, but what did that actually mean for Kemp's Ridleys on that beach? And so what we were seeing is that during those events, those nests were basically under 24/7 threat of predation. So there would be birds present throughout the day. There would be mammals that would come in typically more at night. But there was a small window where it wasn't as heavy, but we still saw them over a 24-hour period. So there does seem to be a high level of pressure of predation at this nesting beach. And not only is there that kind of high level of pressure, but what was really interesting is that I saw predators that became more abundant once those nests were laid. So we had a more low level of predators that would be seen on the cameras, so lower instances of viewing them. Following that nesting event, we then saw that number or those instances of predators being increased, and that would remain at a kind of consistent level until after that hatching event. And then after that hatching event, the numbers dropped back off again. Now I say numbers because I cannot say whether those were, say, well, in the one case, we can say it was 4 individual coyotes because we saw the 4 in the picture, but later on, I can't say if it's one of those 4 that came back or a 5th new one that came over. We don't have that ability with the pictures, but we can say just instances of viewing animals. So they do seem to be under this high threat of predation, which may have contributed to what we're seeing with some of that daytime Arabata nesting, that mass nesting event. And so there's a lot of other questions I think that can come from that. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an idea, again, of some of the research that I've been a part of to kind of understand also where I think are some great directions to go in. So we understand some of this nesting from the primary nesting beach, that nesting beach in Mexico, where we have large numbers of turtles nesting. We're seeing thousands, potentially thousands of turtles nesting during these big Arabatas. We see potential predation that's occurring, but there are some differences, right, between that nesting beach and our nesting beaches. So those nesting beaches, that's located in a very remote area. There's a lot of ranches, so farming that's kind of in that area, but unlike us here on South Padre, there's not hotels, there's not tourism, there's not that kind of stuff. So how does what we know about the ecology and biology of this species relate to what are we doing here on South Padre, on Boca Chica Beach in South Texas? So let's talk about what we're doing here and what things look like with our nesting program, what things look like in the past, what they currently look like, as well as what I kind of see us going towards. So we do have a 3-tier mission here at Sea Turtle Inc. For those of you who are not quite as familiar with us, we have education, rehabilitation, and conservation. So with education, we're focused on educating all ages. So we have programs for children, we have talks that occur every day, we have the facility, we have different outreach events of educating on sea turtles and conservation and how what you do matters and how what you do impacts them. And then we also have the rehabilitation side where we're hoping to rehabilitate turtles, where anything that comes into our hospital, we do our best to get it back out and into the wild. And we have a pretty high rate of being able to release patients. And so that's an area where we're basically mitigating things that are already happening. So we have patients that come in as boat strikes, we have entanglements, we have different interactions, typically human interactions that have resulted in some type of injury that's bringing that turtle to us. Now we also get turtles in that are just debilitated. They kind of wash up, just really lethargic, sometimes emaciated, things like that. But with our rehab side, we're working to mitigate those effects. It's a reactive area. Education, we're trying to make a difference beforehand, educate the public on what we're doing, how what they're doing can affect turtles, and how we can all work together to help these species. And with conservation, we're really focused on basically nesting season. That's our big one. That's our busy season in the conservation department. And so with that, we are also patrolling and protecting Kemp's Ridleys here on South Padre on Boca Chica Beach. And so we go out on patrols, and those patrols for this year started in March. So in March, we actually logged over 120 hours, and that equated to a little over 1,200 miles of nesting beach that we were able to patrol. April starts nesting season. April 1st is typically the start of nesting season. And so with that, we up the patrols that occur. And so in April, we had over 630 hours and over 6,000 miles patrolled. And then May is when we had our very first nest. It was very exciting. Our first nest was laid on May 3rd. And in fact, it was our first nest. And then we had 3 more right behind it. So we had a total of 4 nests on our very first day of nesting, which is a very exciting day here. And so far in May, to date, we've had almost 300 hours and over 2,600 miles of nesting beach that we've patrolled. So let's talk about what a patrol looks like from our end. So Kempsfordleys nest in the daytime. That's the primary species that's nesting here on our beaches, and that's what we've had so far this nesting season. Kempsfordleys, not only do they nest in the daytime, but remember I talked about how they are the smallest of our sea turtle species. They're the smallest in size, they're also the smallest in weight, which means they make very shallow tracks, which is great. Except when you take into account that they really prefer to nest on windy days. It's always been anecdotally said that Kempsfordleys nest on windy days, and we do see a higher prevalence of nesting on windy days. The thought behind that is they may have evolved this preference for nesting on these windy days because that would wipe out their tracks, making it even harder for predators to find those nests. Unfortunately, that also makes it harder for patrollers to find those nests. Because again, they're a very shallow, it's a very shallow track because that is such a small turtle. And when they're on windy days, it can wipe them out, especially if they're in that soft sand a little further up the beach pretty quickly. Kempsfordleys really like to nest at the base of the dune. So they like to come up from the water, basically head up towards that dune, nest right at the base of it, and then head back in. There's a lot of, keep saying interesting things. I'm sorry, guys, because I just think they're so interesting. But there's the thought behind why they nest at the base of the dune is that it makes it a better location for their hatchlings to find the water. And so that was actually part of what I did with my master's research, was looking at how hatchlings orient towards the ocean and whether or not the location of nesting on the nesting beach affects that. I looked at hatchlings that were released in areas with a very distinctive dune like we see, and then in areas that have more of an open area without that distinctive dune. And it was very clear that hatchlings that were released in an area with a distinctive dune headed straight for the ocean, versus those that were in an area that was more open, where both horizons had a more similar silhouette. They spent longer time periods trying to orient. They got misoriented, where they would wander for a while before eventually heading towards the surf. And so that is thought that may be one of the factors why Kempsfordleys prefer to nest at the base of the dune, is because it in turn provides better cues for hatchlings to find the ocean. Okay, so we have our very small turtle coming out of the water, crawling up typically on windy days, nesting at the base of the dune, potentially wind wiping out its tracks to minimize predators finding it, but hopefully we can find them before that. So we have patrols that occur, especially now that we're into nesting season heavily. We have 4 patrols that go out every single day. So from our building here at Sea Turtle Inc., we have one that leaves at 7:30. We have one, 7:30, 9 o'clock. 7. We leave at 7, 8:30. There we go. 10 and 11:30. I don't know why I'm blanking on our times. I just went on patrol yesterday. Maybe that's why I'm blanking on them. But we have 4 patrols that leave. And so we have basically somebody on the nesting beach from about 7 in the morning until 6 in the afternoon, so that we have eyes out there. The beach is about a little over 25 miles long on South Padre. And so it's a pretty good distance. It takes about 3 hours to go from where we're at towards the jetties. We patrol from roughly Sea Turtle Inc. to the Port Mansfield Cut. So up to those jetties. Take a short rest there to get something to eat, or look at the jetties and look for turtles, things like that, and then turn back around and make that trip back. We also patrol Boca Chica Beach. So Boca Chica is also one of our response areas. And so for Boca Chica, what we do is we actually head over. We have one person that's there. It's a smaller beach, so that one person makes multiple passes. They'll go the entire length of the beach, basically from those Boca Chica jetties all the way down to that Rio Grande River, and then they'll turn back and come back. And that's considered a full pass, and they'll do several of those throughout the day, especially if we know that we have nesting on South Padre. They will do longer passes, stay out there longer to make sure we have eyes on that beach as well, and we can collect nests from there too. So once we've gone out, we've patrolled, we found the tracks, we found the female, then what do? We protect those nests. So we move our nest to an incubation facility. So we have a corral. It's a protected area of the nesting beach. As you can see in these pictures, it's fenced off, it's gated, it has signs indicating what it is, why we have it, things like that. And so we move all of those nests to protect them. So our nests are moved in these styrofoam boxes that you can see here. And then they get reburied into the corral, and they get buried in a manner very similar to the way they were laid. So we dig them at a similar depth. They average about 35 centimeters to the middle of the egg mass from the top of the surface of the sand. And they get buried in that blast shape that the female typically digs for her nest. So she digs out a flash shape, and when we rebury our nest, we also dig out a flash shape. So it's a very similar manner. We also monitor temperatures. So all sea turtles have temperature-dependent sex determination, meaning that the temperature that the eggs develop at will determine the sex of the hatchling. So in the case of sea turtles, cooler temperatures produce males and warmer temperatures produce females. And so we monitor those temperatures to see what we are producing. And then come hatching season, so that's about 45 days after the nest has been laid, those hatchlings emerge, and we have somebody that's in that corral consistently to make sure that we can collect them quickly as soon as they emerge on the surface of the nest. We do take a few measurements, and then we release them further down the beach where it's dark and it's a safer area to release them. So far in 2021, we have had 12 nests. We are up to 12. It's very exciting. We had 4 back on May 3rd. We've had a few more since then, so now we are up to 12 with, we had 5 that came in on Mother's Day. So the turtles' gift to us were their eggs. Going back a little bit, in 2020, we had a total of 79 nests and we protected over 7,200 eggs. And in 2019, we had 49 nests and 4,300 eggs. So we are seeing kind of a cyclical pattern as well here on our nesting beaches, similar to what they see at that primary location in Rancho Nuevo. So what do I see for the future? I have a lot of varied research interests. Clearly, Arabata nesting and those nesting behaviors is one of my big passions and one of the areas I'm very interested in. But I'm also interested in a lot that stemmed from our cold stun event, right? We had so many turtles that came in. We had huge numbers and we had such a wide variety of sizes. So they ranged from really little guys all the way to full-sized breeding adults. First of all, what were those adults doing in the Laguna at that time? I don't know, and that's a great question. I'm very interested. Looking at the numbers that we had in there, I'm interested in our habitat usage. So we had all these green turtles come in. We also had some loggerheads come in, and I'm interested in what are some of those hot spots and how does that potentially overlap across species, as well as fishery interactions. So a lot of what we get in, we get hook entanglements, we get boat strikes, we get a lot of these, we get wreck fisheries, but we also get potentially some commercial fisheries interactions. So I'd like to know more about what's going on and how potentially can we mitigate some of that and potentially prevent it from happening to better serve the turtles and also allow for some of our fisheries and things like that to have that better interaction where they're not spending time interacting with turtles and endangered species. A lot of different questions, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about your thoughts as well. And so I just want to give you a quick idea about some of the things that we have here. One of the things is our internship program. And so our internship program now is departmentalized. And so our internship program is focused on a conservation department, in our rehab department, or in our education department. And that runs from March through August. And so like for our conservation interns, they are helping us with patrols, with building the corral, with hatching, all of those types of things that go into our nesting season. And so applications for next year open in September. Our interns do have shared housing and a stipend. And it's one of the things that is very exciting to me is to see up and coming students that are interested in the sciences, that are typically recent grads that are now interested in getting involved in conservation. And so I'd like to thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate it. I've had a wonderful time speaking with you. There's a lot of ways you can get involved with us with volunteering if you are not already, as well as my contact information, and I would love to take your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We do have questions that have been posted on chat. First one I see is, we just see one at a time in South Padre. Would we ever see multiple turtles nesting at one time?
I love that question because I sure hope so. So we do. What's interesting is we do get kind of Arabatas here still. They're just really small right now, right? Like on Monday we had 5 turtles. For us, that's an Arabata. It's more than one. And so for us, it's just a really small version. And what's been neat is a lot of times that corresponds to some of the nesting that's also occurring in Mexico. And they'll have nesting typically on some of the same days that we have nesting. And so they had a big nesting event last Wednesday. We had nesting last Wednesday. We had two, so not quite as big, but we still had nesting. And so I think that is one of the really interesting questions of what specifically is driving that behavior and how is that facilitated? And I don't know the answer, and I don't know if I'll ever know the answer, but I sure hope I will. And so I think that we are seeing a growth in the number of turtles that are nesting here, and I think we're going to continue to see that growth. And so I think potentially we could see larger numbers of turtles, potentially, more than one in the space that you can even see, which I think would be great.
Excellent. I believe you mentioned there's a question about the number of eggs, and I think you had said they range between 80 to 120.
They do, yep, about 80 to 120. They typically lay about 2 to 3 times per season, and they lay more eggs at the beginning and fewer towards the end of that season.
So we can see that same turtle come back a couple of times. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Have we eliminated human predation?
For the most part, yes. So as far as on the nesting beach. So one of the historic things was there was a lot of egg take at the nesting beach in Renton. And there was a lot of work with the community there to protect the turtles. And so now the majority of the people that work for that conservation program that's located at that nesting beach are locals from the town. And I'm still friends with quite a few of them. One of them, he grew up actually, and he remembers his dad collecting eggs. And he was really little, he remembers that. And then he remembers that shift over to when they kind of stopped. And now for a while, he was the manager of that camp. And so there's been a really great shift in that mentality of let's protect this. This is part of, this is a resource that's important to the ecology of the area. And so we've seen that shift to protecting the turtles versus collecting the eggs. And so there really, at least at that specific area, there really is not a lot of threat. There is still a threat to egg collection for like olive ridleys and things like that, but right now not with our Kemp's ridleys, thankfully, which is really great.
Now you mentioned petroleum Boca Chica. Has SpaceX had any effect or impact on your ability to access Boca Chica?
Yes and no. So obviously there's been a lot of road closures. And so we've been working with them. They've been a really good partner with us so far. And so we know when road closures are happening. And so we shift our patrols a little bit to make sure that we can spend more time out there prior to the closure. And so thankfully, so far, we have been able to pull any nest that has shown up there. We had, we've just had one actual nest so far. We've had a couple of tracks, but that turtle didn't lay a nest. It came up, didn't like something about the beach and headed back. And we see that occasionally. We see that on South Padre as well. But thankfully, so far, yes, the road closures, we can't, patrol necessarily in the afternoon on some of those days, but thankfully we've been able to get nests so far. So hopefully that continues to be the case throughout the season, but we'll see.
This last question is something I thought of too. In a concentrated area, are turtles able to avoid nests with eggs from turtles that arrived earlier?
That is a great question, and no, they do not. So we will see that some of them dig up other nests. Another part of the research, I didn't talk about this aspect, but we are also looking at some of that in the sense of when turtles come up, does having a lot of turtles around them maybe disturb them and they leave? And so we do see that sometimes we have turtles that will come up and either they will, I don't know, not like the beach, but mostly like in these areas where you have so many turtles, there may be something about that density that just says no. And we wonder if that's part of it, where they turn around, they go back, they don't necessarily lay. Or if they're laying, we will see other turtles like crawl over them, or they finish and then they dig up the same spot. So then you'll see eggs over here. And so we're kind of wondering if maybe there's a mechanism that they come up, they see it's too high, they leave, and either they go further down the beach or they come back a few hours. I don't really know, but we do see some of that where they will dig up each other's eggs. So.
And one last question that just showed up. Will debris from launches from SpaceX have an effect in the future?
That's a great question, and I do not know. I don't know the answer, but it's something I'd like to look into. It potentially could. I think it depends on how big, how small, what areas. I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns, but it's something I'm really interested in for sure.
Excellent. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Great
Absolutely.
presentation. Um, if there's any questions, I know folks can email you, contact Sea Turtle Inc. We have volunteers that are there that are happy to convey questions over as well.
Absolutely. Yes,
So again,
please feel free to contact me.
excellent. Thank you so much, Amy, and we look forward to hopefully visiting your facility soon.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me. Like I said, I really enjoyed speaking with you guys tonight.
All right, folks, let me switch over to my presentation. So
Am
again,
I
thank
okay to
you.
join you for the rest of your meeting?
Sure, of course.
Okay.
All right, fantastic. All right, a few other things I wanted to touch base with real quick on some of our advanced training and volunteer opportunities. We have published the May list for advanced training on our website. And one of the ones that I thought that we found, and this one I just found out today, and the U.S. native bees have been trying to initiate some sort of programs for us to be much more aware of native bees versus what we typically hear of the honeybees and so forth. And so they all year they've been trying to figure out what to do. We threw in our name for our chapter to say, hey, we are interested in helping. And so some information that I just received today, they created a bee short course for community scientists. And over, I believe that's 7 months, the third Friday of every month, for about an hour, they'll cover bee botany, biology, collection, identification, monitoring, and so forth. And what they've done is sort of gathered specialists from across the country to be able to present their area of specialty. So if you're interested in learning more about native bees, how to identify them, some of the unique aspects of their anatomy that lets you identify one versus the other, this will be something for you to take a look at. It's a bee short course for community scientists. Hopefully it is something that we can use in the City Nature Challenge, for example, that helps us identify some of the things that we see in our region. They've also created what they call a Pollinator Ambassador Outreach Toolkit. Uh, the university that created this, I think it's in Minnesota, they're making it physically available for some of the teachers in that area, but they've made the digital versions available to anybody else that wants it. So if you volunteer at a place that you think, you know what, this is a topic that would be great for the kids that come visit the park, that come visit your facility, or it's just something that you want to better yourself so that you can talk about this when you're giving tours, take a look at this outreach toolkit. The digital cards on the different bees and so forth, I think are very useful for any of us that do any kind of outreach where this topic might show up. They also list national projects that are related to what they're searching for, including the Great American Bee Count, the Bumblebee Watch, the Backyard Bumblebee Count, and the Great Sunflower Project. Some of these projects, we're going to take a closer look at it, make sure it fits our criteria for you to earn a volunteer time. Some of these you can do from your own backyard. Essentially, the Great Sunflower Project, for example, basically says, hey, grow some sunflowers and then take some time to observe and capture the pollinators that are coming to visit your sunflowers. So there are things that we can do if you have that kind of backyard that you can monitor some of these things. These are some of the projects that we're looking into further, and we'll let you know. But I will post this on our Facebook page. This link up here will get you to the B short course where you can register and sign up for that. The first one is May 27th. And again, they're only about an hour long. That website also has a link where you can go in and register for this Pollinator Ambassador Outreach Toolkit. They will then send you the link so that you can access all their digital material, and you'll get on their mailing list so that they'll let you know when they publish new information. And so some of these things are really neat. I did take a look at all of these bee activities. So if there was a iNaturalist project that was related to bee activities for our region, for the state of Texas, they do want to sort of loop this into all these other projects that they're aware of. And just quickly, I don't think we have too many. Now, one of the things I'm going to explore is, well, what if we created one for the RGV? We created an RGV pollinator or RGV bee project in iNaturalist, and hopefully we can link our own project into this national effort to sort of assess the native bee population for our country. So check that out. Again, this is already listed in our AT list, advanced training list of opportunities. Look for May 27th, and you'll find that this same link for this information. One of the volunteer opportunities that has been formally approved are these fish trails, or what we're calling fish trails, out at the fish hatchery station in Brownsville. If you're interested in volunteering, we go out there on Wednesdays starting at 5:30 and Saturdays now starting at 7:30. And we have a blog where we're sort of posting some of the things that we're doing out there, from pulling guinea grass to last week planting some of the first plants that we want to create our own pollinator garden out there. We do find some of these discoveries, like these apple snails that are an invasive species. To see one of these things, hold it, if they're 3 to 4 inches big, it's like from a horror movie. You can imagine all these snails coming out of the fish hatchery and attacking the neighbors in that neighborhood. But it's really interesting. One of the main things that we're trying to do is establish trails around these ponds and try to give the community access. It's a very beautiful site, and there's so much of it that we can't see simply because there's so much stuff in the way, including Brazilian pepper. So we started going out there with our chainsaws trying to get that Brazilian pepper, especially get it now before it's now starting to come back. So unfortunately, the freeze did not kill the Brazilian pepper all the way back. So hopefully we'll continue to do that. If you're free and you're interested, let me know. I'll add you to our mailing list. And it's just a really neat opportunity for us to build something brand new. These trails, the Fishery Station tried to create these trails at one point, but they need the help. And I think we're in a great position to help them out. So check out that blog posts and let me know if you're interested in helping out. And one last thing, Tony mentioned that they are needing help with red tide monitoring, and there will be new red tide training coming up. As soon as Tony gets that information, I'm trying to remember, Tony, if you had said it was in the next month or two, or was it June, July?
We're going to try to do it in July, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
And
so
also, we've got another device that called a HabScope. We need monthly monitoring with that. But we tried to crank them up recently and they're not working, so we've got to work that out too.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out, and Tony will let us know when that gets scheduled, and we'll let everybody know that is interested in doing that.
Thank you.
Sure. I never had heard of what red tide was until I happened to go down on the beach, and all these dead fish were on the beach, and it's an amazing event, yet horrific at the same time. So definitely, if there's anything that we can help on that monitoring, I'm sure everyone will appreciate it. Okay, and my last photo that I'm sharing with you is one of the ones that I found for the City Nature Challenge out at Palo Alto Battlefield. And I think it was just a fluke that I was at the right place at the right time where this horny-toed lizard was sunbathing. And I happened to be looking when he looked up to look at me. And I saw that little brown movement and I thought, well, that's odd. And I don't have the picture, but it was funny that there was a harvester ant, a couple of harvester ants crawling on top of it. So I don't think they knew exactly what they were dealing with. But really interesting, and I'm definitely hoping to go out there and find a couple more. If you wish, if there are any questions, please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't think that's a question, so I'll mute Paula. Does anybody have any questions, comments, ideas, we certainly welcome any ideas on projects that we might take a look at. Any advanced training that you discover, please pass those along. We'll add them to our list. Any of those things that we'll take a look at. Oh, one of the ones I want to mention, I know Alicia, you're on the call. Alicia is looking for us to help with the birding event, birding festival this year with some of the educational outreach. And Alicia was going to give me some more information to share with everybody to see what we can do to sort of take on that effort this year. Alicia, do you have anything you wish to share on that?
I don't yet, but if anybody's interested, to call me and I will talk to Sue, and maybe they can start attending some of those planning meetings that are held once a month right now. So if anybody's interested, to send you an email, and then you can let me know, and then I'll turn in all the list to Sue.
And Alicia, if you'll at least add me to the list, that way I can
Okay.
sort of represent our
Yes.
chapter, and we can gather more folks that are interested as we go forward.
Yes. Thank you, Robert.
Sure. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll call this meeting over. Again, thank you so much, Amy, for your presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Robert, I've got one last question for Amy.
Sure.
Amy, what is the estimated population of the Kemp's Ridleys at this time?
A good question. So the reason I say that is, so part of what I looked at with my most recent research, which was just like a couple years ago now, is we saw some pretty high numbers of false crawls in those high density areas, which could affect some of those numbers that potentially were estimated. But I believe the population is around, probably around that kind of 20,000 range. So we're not nearly what we used to be. There's a different carrying capacity. When we're seeing, we're probably under that too, because we have multiple 2 to 3 nests per season, and we're looking at about 20 to 30,000 nests. And so you're looking at probably about 10 to 15. But yeah, it's a good question. It is. There's still a lot that we need to know to really get a better handle on it. We need to know a little bit more about some of that remigration interval, as far as, do they come back every other year? Has it extended? And so there's a lot that I think we still need to know to get a better handle on it. But yeah, that's about where we're at right about now, probably.
Thank you.
Sure. I know that probably was a very long, convoluted answer, but it's the scientist in me.
All right, very good. Thanks again, Amy, and
Yeah,
thanks everyone.
thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
And everyone have a good evening.
Right.